where Jesus showed him the wounds on his hands that he got from the cross, which makes me wonder, even when there is resurrection and death, how would that work in terms of like you still have the wounds like on your hands, or Jesus' case, like the trauma from like being crucified on the cross? Like, how do you make sense of this?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing. Theologians have actually noted this for a long time, that Jesus bears those scars in whatever existence there is after ascension. At the same time, obviously, that has to be some kind of metaphor for what we carry with us. All different types of trauma, like, not to be graphic here, but dismemberment or different things, like obviously people aren't going to be in heaven, torn apart by lions, martyrs in the first century, those types of things. So I don't think we should carry the metaphor too far, but theologians for hundreds, thousands of years now have noted this idea that resurrection is not about a complete separation with the past. It's about a transcendence and a moving forward. One of the phrases that I've used here at Commons before is we transcend and include all of our experiences. So every time we grow and we evolve as a human being, we learn something new, we transcend the way that we used to think, the way that we used to experience the world, but that comes with us. It's still part of our story. And so in a practical, what is it like in an afterlife, in a heaven, and that type of a thing, I think we're into speculation. I don't think it really works when you try to carry the metaphor too far. But as a metaphor for that idea, that resurrection is a way of transcending this life, but still including everything that we've experienced and bringing it with us, I think it's quite a beautiful image. And I think that's why theologians have grabbed a hold of it the same way that you are right now. Because in our lives, there are things that are painful and hard and difficult, but we don't want to leave them behind. We want to transcend them. We don't want to live there anymore, but they're still part of us. They've shaped us, and we want to bring that with us. That happens as we grow. That happens in whatever we imagine for ourselves post this experience of life.
What can sometimes be helpful for us when we really get into the weeds of these stories is, again, to kind of shift gears. The scholar Will Gaffney uses this really beautiful phrase in her work. I think it's your sanctified imagination. Does that sound right? And that we bring ourselves to these stories and we can kind of imagine what the truth of them says to us. And so when I employ my sanctified imagination, I just can't even imagine encountering all being and not being able to be my whole being. I think I want to take my whole self into that encounter that is impossible for me to ever get my tiny little Bobby brain around. And so I think these questions are good. And when they come up and we start, pulling them apart, we can step toward them again, with a bit of a sanctified imagination, believing that the Spirit is with us and that there is maybe a truth being called to us. So for me, when you asked that question, Jonah, I just thought about, I want all being to encounter my whole being. Yeah.
I'll throw it out there before we go to the next one, but there's a book on the shelf called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request. It's about the experience of disability and faith and how that fits together for this one particular woman and wanting to be embraced not for what she might be someday when she's quote unquote healed, but as she experiences life right now. And there's something really profound about that for us to think about people who have other experiences of ability and disability in this world, but then also, how does that relate to my own trauma and my own hard moments in life as well? Let's take one more.
How do we handle death when we're skeptical about the existence of an afterlife and are not convinced there is one?
It's a good question. I don't have a great answer. What I will say is this: I consider myself always an eternal agnostic. I don't know what happens after we die. I don't know what that looks like. I think everything in the Bible that talks about post-death is using language from this experience of life to talk about what is next and to affirm that we have a trust that God will do good for us. What does life look like that's not here right now in this body that I'm experiencing? I don't know. I can barely even imagine that. And yet, I have this profound, fundamental, foundational trust that God will do good for me, not just in this life, but in whatever the experience of death is. So I do happen to believe in an afterlife. I do happen to believe there's something beyond that. But I also think there are ways for us in the midst of our doubts and the midst of our struggles to talk about things we've never experienced, to still find a kernel of faith in that and say, this is going to carry me through life, and I'm going to trust that God is going to do good for me, even if this is the end of it. And when I die, I'm going to be planted in the ground and that's the end. Then the only reason that could possibly happen is because that is the best thing that God could do for me. That's my faith. Now, I happen to believe there are better things because of how I experience life and what I hope for, and so that's what I put my trust in. But if you can hold on to that, I think there are ways that you can move through life. I think there are ways you can follow Jesus and still be very open-handed and very humble and very agnostic about what comes next. That's a tough one.
Love that. Love that answer. There was something I didn't get to include, and that is this point, that death anxiety is a very real thing. And the data shows that the way that we actually manage our death anxiety is by living a value-based life. So you decide what you really care about in life. You determine your values. You're very conscious of that. And you live toward it. That will bring down your death anxiety. So I love what you said, but that's also just straight up some truth.
I'll add something. We've had some death in our community recently. I had a good friend, we've talked about it, Brandon Healy, who passed away. We were just at his memorial, a bunch of us as staff and people here in the community on Monday. A young dad, 3-month-old son, just passed away. I was at his bedside the day he died, just about an hour before he passed away. And I've been through this a lot. It's really difficult, but I've been in those moments as a pastor a number of times. But this was someone who in his last hour was telling me, just please tell everyone how grateful I am, that there's people around me that love Julianne, that are going to look after Walter. Like, even in that moment, to carry that kind of, yes, faith, because he was a Christian, he believed in heaven, he believed in Jesus, he believed in salvation and all that, but also just faith and value for this life that he lived, and how that was going to carry on in the community that was going to look after his wife and his child. I mean, it was incredibly humbling to be there and have this guy ministering to me in those last kind of moments. And if we can do what Bobby's saying, live with that kind of value right to the very end, then I think we can live with a lot of trust that God will do good for us no matter what. So.